Hey, everybody, welcome back to Johnny Can't Sleep. This is a podcast that is geared towards all of those thoughts you have at night when you can't fall asleep and your brain wanders in all these weird places and you have some crazy thoughts, maybe very thought provoking and interesting thoughts, and you wonder what other people may think about them. This podcast is for you if that's what goes on in your head, and we will have lots of different episodes to discuss a lot of great topics. And I am your host, Dustin, and I have my little brother, Cody, on with us today. And today, our topic is going to be scary encounters or unexplained encounters that you've had. Should be a lot of fun, so listen along as I go through some of my stories. I've got 4 or 5 good stories. My last stories you'll want to listen to until the end because they get really good. And I don't know what my little brother is going to mention. One of my first memories that I have is going to be age 5. It was a memorable moment. June 3rd, 1980. There were about 7 or 8 tornadoes that came through our town and destroyed a heck of a lot of stuff. 5 years old. We are at my Aunt Janine's house. We're hanging out. My Uncle Calvin just got done in the military. I believe he retired after maybe 20 years in the military. A lot of aunts and uncles and cousins and all of us are around hanging out in my Aunt Janine's basement or in the backyard. And this was in the evening. Anyhow, if you're aware of what it's like to be in a tornado, or if you even live in Tornado Alley, you know about tornado sirens. So where my aunt lived was the edge of town, especially at that point. It was just all cornfields just beyond my aunt and uncle's house. And of course, the sirens go off, and this is probably what happens in a lot of places that get tornadoes. About 3 of my uncles go out back at that point to go look for the tornado. My Uncle Calvin had a new video camera. He was videoing, and Uncle Calvin, Uncle Norman, and it seems like my Uncle Mike was back from Hawaii also at that point. I remember there were 3 of the uncles in the backyard walking over to the cornfield looking to see where in the heck the tornadoes are. And of course, all the aunts are yelling at all the uncles to get their butts in the basement, and eventually everybody goes down in the basement, and the sirens went off for a super long time, I think because one tornado probably spun off another one and another one, and in the end, it might have been a couple hours of tornadoes. Now, usually that's not the case. A tornado will touch down and maybe be on the ground for a few minutes and then go back up into the clouds, and the vast majority of them don't do much damage, but I guess it was ideal conditions that night. I remember trying to get home afterwards, and about every road we went down had down trees or down power lines, and what should have taken maybe 15 minutes to get home took us probably an hour. I remember it took a long time because every road you tried to go down was not passable. But that was one of my first memories, just the aftermath and the damage, and it was just devastation all over the place. And every year, June 3rd, 1980 comes around, and my Facebook lights up with somebody that's been through it, posts something about it. Every year never fails. It's how impactful it was for a lot of us. So that's my tornado story. I got a lot more stories, but I will let Cody share a story. Go ahead and let us know what you have that's a scary encounter or something unexplained.
As far as the tornadoes go, that was the one that everyone talks about around here. Of course, there were times where there were bad storms, the sirens would go off, everyone goes outside like it's the tradition. You don't usually go in your basement right away. You go out and look at what's going on, and then if it gets real scary, then at that point, yeah, you go in your basement. There was nothing real crazy like that when I was a kid. It really changed the town a lot, and even was it Twisters, the movie they said was based on that?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
the movie Twister, I believe. Well, there was a book written about it. Night of the Twisters is the book written about that experience that I've been through. They made a movie out of it too in the 90s. I think it had John Schneider, one of the guys from the Dukes of Hazzard, was one of the central characters in it. Of course, they have a different name for the town in that movie. I don't know if the movie Twister later on was loosely based or used some of the information. I know a couple years ago when we were home for 4th of July, we had those tornadoes that came through just south of town. That was the kids' first experience with a tornado and tornado sirens and going in the basement and then going out afterwards and actually seeing the aftermath and the damage and monstrous trees that were taken down, 100-foot trees. So it was kind of crazy. So anyhow, so that's, you say you had any other tornado stories?
There were nothing major for storms when I was a kid.
Gotcha.
My stories are more geared towards the paranormal, or like even
Okay. Well, why
like
don't you share one of your paranormal type of stories that you've got?
Okay. So this was when I was in high school. I was over at a friend's house, and his neighbor was over there and was saying they were moving out of their house. And of course, someone asks why. And he wasn't moving out of town or anything, but they were just moving across town to a different house. They were going to sell their house. He said this one was haunted. And of course, we were curious, but we didn't really think much of it at the time. So nobody was living there. They were in the process of moving out, but most of their stuff was gone. There was still quite a bit there, but they were pretty well moved out at the time. So we go over there, we go into the basement, we're just kind of hanging out, and we didn't really experience much right off the bat, other than, I mean, it's an old house, it's probably early 1900s, and so you could hear a little bit of creakiness, stuff that kind of sounds like footsteps up above you, but nothing that was like, oh, we're scared. And so then we're kind of getting a little bored, and some of the people there were like, trying to call out the ghost that was supposed to be there. And if you're here, present yourself. And we're just standing there, kind of by the stairway, and it's a pretty big open basement. It was probably 25 feet or so across the room. Wouldn't say there were any drafts or open windows to speak. And we're kind of taunting the ghost, and all of a sudden, there was a picture that was hanging on the wall. Not only does it fall down, you see it swing up and over, and just the glass shattered. It was absolutely terrifying. We all took off. We ran out the door. We were scared to come back for a while. Sure enough, an hour goes by and we get up the courage to go back. That was the scariest part of it. That was something like I'd never seen or experienced before, but you got a really eerie vibe in that house. The whole thing they talk about where you kind of feel the chills and you get the goosebumps, and it's just really kind of weird feeling.
Yeah.
So we didn't go back in the basement after that. That was really a crazy experience. But after we'd heard those footsteps above us when we were waiting on all that to happen, we were at one point, they were loud enough. We were like, "Are you sure your mom's not here moving stuff out?" And there wasn't anyone there. And so then we went upstairs to the main level, and then it was like a story and a half house. So the above the main level was just like a level with a bedroom off to the side, each side of the hallway, and then one at the end, or at least a little room. And
Gotcha.
and then the first room when we went up, it was just your stereotypical kind of creepy house. Like there's dolls and like really old like antique style looking dolls that are kind of creepy, and it was more the feeling that you got when you were up there was just really, really weird. But even when you were upstairs at the highest level of the house, you could hear footsteps down below us. So those would have been like on that main level. And it was just the craziest thing. 'Cause none of us really went into that house believing in ghosts, or even, that house in particular would have been haunted. But every one of us that was there left feeling extremely weird, like that was something that none of us had ever experienced before. And it was definitely,
Yeah. That's crazy.
yeah, it
Especially
was,
with a picture like falling off the wall and everyone's like staring at it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there was no movement down there. We were all just across the room. We weren't even close, and it swung up to the side and then just crashed down and broke the glass. It was
Wow.
absolutely nuts.
Do you remember back about 2003 or 4-ish in Arizona where our sister Ashley had just moved. We went up to Jerome,
Oh yeah.
Arizona, and the big grand hotel that is on the side of the mountain. I think that Grand Hotel used to be the United Verde Hospital. Then it was an insane asylum. Now those rooms have been converted to hotel rooms. We went up there because Jerome is a cool old mining town, but that big Jerome Grand Hotel is supposed to be majorly haunted. We were there. Of course, this is film camera days, and Dad took some pictures, and you're standing up on the top of the steps. And it's kind of an eerie picture when you look at it. It's got the vacancy sign, and then Jerome Grand Hotel is kind of lit up with a light on each word, but it's a little bit hazy. But the funny thing is, there's like kind of a hazy fog in that picture, but all the rest of the pictures, when they got developed, were like perfectly clean and clear. It was like a weird ghostly haze that came across that picture.
That
And I
was
have that picture. I'm going to share it real quick so people can see this picture. It's really, really crazy. So this is the picture. Can you see it?
Yeah, right
So
between
there's
the.
you. You're standing up there. The picture is very hazy, but it was a super clear night. All the other pictures we took around there and even around the corner were perfectly clear, but it's just kind of a real creepy, eerie picture. Anyhow, it was one of those where like this place is supposed to be haunted. People would talk about how you could take pictures, there'd be like a ghostly presence in the picture. I think that was one of those weird situations. So have you ever been out to that bridge they call Witch's Bridge?
Uh-huh. Oh yeah. We've been out there
So
when.
I figured, like all of us locals there knew about Witch's Bridge, but that's always a creepy, eerie place to go. And we used to go out there, like if you wanted to try to scare someone, you had all of this pentagram graffiti and stuff like that on the bridge, and supposedly satanic people would meet out there. And of course, the bridge was over one of the river channels that usually was always dry, and it was a little bit off the beaten path, so hardly anyone went out there, but the road still went across the bridge. I remember multiple times going out there because Ashley, my little sister, your older sister, used to want to go out there with her friends. Be like, oh, take us to Witch's Bridge. It's scary. Let's see if we can get scared or see a ghost or something. I remember there was one time we went out there, and as we got onto the bridge, I think I put the car in neutral, and then you do the little thing with the gas where you're like, it won't go. And they might have been in junior high, and I think I was probably in college by that point, and I was probably back for a weekend. And then there was another spot that we went to because they wanted to know about any spooky spots you knew about. So we drove over probably 20 minutes from there, a spot. I'll tell you where it is off camera, but there's a spot where there is a church in the middle of an old pioneer graveyard. Some of the graves are pioneer, some are probably newer, but it's really weird and mysterious. Off some gravel road in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska, this church just sitting there smack dab in the middle of this graveyard. There's graves all around it. There is a gate and a sidewalk that goes through the graveyard right up to the front door of the church. And it's one of those weird, eerie feelings, especially at night. And we went there after Witch's Bridge one night, and it was one of those things where you don't know if you disturb some spirits, but we're there, and everyone's just looking at this church and like, ooh, yeah, that's very eerie or weird looking, or why would you put a church in the middle of a graveyard? That makes no sense. And off next to the church and graveyard was an old rundown school or just an old rundown farmhouse. But if it was a farmhouse, it wasn't very big. It was only a couple of rooms and then an upper story with a couple of rooms. But I don't believe there was any paint on any of the wood anymore. It's super weathered, looked old and spooky and creepy. I mean, this place looked like it was probably ready to fall down.
Yeah.
And so everybody's looking at the church. I start looking ahead at the farmhouse or the school or whatever it is. I'm looking at it. It's completely dark, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I catch something in the second story window that looks like a figure holding a candle, and it goes past the window, so it's kind of flickered and illuminating as it goes past. And I'm looking at it, and you're not sure if your brain is playing tricks on you, but Ashley's friend Krista was in the car and she gasped right at that second. So I knew that she saw it. I said, "Did you see that?" And she said, "Yes." She's like, "What was that, or who was that?" And no one else in the car saw it. So Ashley didn't see it, Carrie didn't see it, no one else saw it, but Krista did. And yeah, it was one of those weird, creepy things where you're like, okay, I know I saw what I know I saw, but luckily in that situation, someone else saw it too, so it wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me. But there was no business for anyone to be in that house that looked like it was about ready to fall down. So, it was kind of a creepy situation. So you said you had another paranormal?
Yeah, not one that I had experienced directly, but my wife Stephanie, she lived in a house that was also very old, maybe 1920s or so, and it was a small house, but um, so her room when she was getting older, she was the oldest of her three, well, two siblings, but three sisters total. She had lived downstairs in the room down there, and she always talked about how that house had a weird feel growing up, and then that you would hear these footsteps that sounded like they were coming from the living room to the basement down the stairs. I had been there some because her parents had still lived there when we had met. They do still own that house to this day. They just don't live there anymore. So it does sit vacant. Yeah, so the house was pretty old, and so you never really know what to expect, whether it's creaks or anything like that from the house or the furnace, whatever it may be. It did have a floor furnace at that time, and that's since changed. So I'm kind of curious to see if those noises are still there. But it had these pretty steep stairs that were going down it. So if you took a step down them, you could hear it. We'd been in that room before, and I'd heard it's like a thunk, 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 and it does sound like going down the stairs, and you almost do feel like you can hear it getting closer to you as the thunks progress. But I'd never stayed the night there or anything to say, oh yeah, it's really weird overnight. But she had several friends stay over as she was a kid, and they only did it once. There wasn't ever stay over again. They'd always stay at there. And the other weird part was her sister's room. Her other sister shared a room, which was right directly across from the living room, and there wasn't an actual doorway there. It was just like a case opening, and then they had a curtain across it, and so that curtain wasn't always shut. But Stephanie always said when she'd get real creeped out downstairs from hearing all the footstep noises, she would take off as fast as she could and go up the stairs and then go lay with her sisters in their bed. And then she said she would always just cover her face with the comforter because she would get this weird feeling that someone was sitting in that chair in the living room, which she had to run all the way across to. So she was extra freaked out, but she would get this feeling that someone was sitting in that chair, like looking back at her like that. She never said anything about it to her sisters. They never talked about it. But years later, after they had all grown up and moved out, her youngest sister, Ashley, had said, oh, that house was so creepy. And that chair, I always felt like someone was staring back at me from. And then Stephanie was like, what? And then Haley said the same thing. And she's like, you're kidding me. And Stephanie was like, I thought I was the only one that felt like that. And I just thought I was paranoid, but no, they all said the same thing without it ever having been brought up in the past. So that's
Wow.
pretty creepy too.
It's one of those things where you feel like maybe there's some other history in that house. What happened in this house before we lived here? Like
There wasn't
someone
any.
died in there or something like that. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, that I don't know. As far as like haunting wise, though, or like people passing away there, that nobody knows. But it was an old enough house that more than likely had happened at some point. Someone had. She always said it felt like a manly presence, and kind of not necessarily like evil, but just not friendly.
Gotcha. My daughter Callie wants to tell a quick story too, and then I'll get into a couple of my best stories I've saved for last. But
Okay.
we'll let Callie sit here for just a minute and tell a story.
All right. Hey, Kelly.
Okay. Hi. So at my school, they have kind of a like a wood shop as one of the electives you can have. And I swear the wood shop is haunted and the ghost either likes me or does not like me and I don't know which is worse.
Huh.
But so me and my friends, we were making kind of like a little horror film kind of thing, and we were
Okay.
doing it in the wood shop, and my friend was trying to like show me like the progress he'd made so far. So we all sat at like this table, and I was sitting on like this side, and there's like two sides. I was sitting here, and then all my friends were over on this side, and I felt like a brush like on my back. And I thought one of my friends was going to like sit down. So I turn, and as I'm turning, I noticed the friend that I thought was over there is like right in front of me. And then I look around, and nobody's there. So that was really weird. And then a few minutes later, after we're done like watching the film so far, we hear like a little thud from the other side of the workshop, which is really weird because literally we are the only people in there, and we're on the opposite end of the wood shop. And then, so everybody like goes over there to check it out, and then I, for some reason, get this feeling that like I should like stay over here. And then while I'm like over there, um, I feel like another like hand on my back again. And then I swear I see like a shadowy figure behind like my friends. And so I'm all, oh no, 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 no. And then there's another area in my school that I think is haunted, the auditorium, and that ghost likes me too. So me and my friends, obviously because the ghost scares me, because it likes me specifically, it I've seen it like it slammed a door one time, and I swear I can see it like in the audience when it's like dark. And then there was one time that when me and my like friends were going in there to like check it out, someone had a flashlight and they were like, pointing it around the auditorium. And I saw like a shadow figure that looked like a kid my age, and I was like, I bolted out of there. And even the younger kids in the grade under me would like bully me about that. So I've had a couple little ghost encounters.
I mean, you never know. Some schools they have a lot of history, and you just don't know what's happened there. People actually said that about Grand Island Senior High when I'd gone there, and I was never in the auditorium a tremendous amount to know, but it was actually the auditorium that they said at Gish was haunted too. So
Yeah.
some of
Yeah, I
those old,
forgot about that. But yeah, the senior high was supposed to be haunted too.
yeah, it's in that auditorium.
I have another story. I told you I saved the best for last. So a couple summers ago, we went to Pagosa Springs, Colorado, to the hot springs, and we were there for a few days. And my buddy Cameron came and joined us with his wife. Well, we were in Pagosa, and we were at a hot springs there. Cameron and I are hanging out in the big main pool, but the way it was set up, you go in and there's a men's bathhouse and a women's bathhouse where people can change. And if you go another way, go all the way through the bathhouse, there is like a little private little hot springs pool for people that maybe don't want to be in the big pool with everybody. So, but we weren't doing that. We were coming back out of the bathhouse, going to the main pool so we could hang out with the wives and kids. So we're hanging out, we're talking maybe 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes after we're getting in the pool and talking, we see someone come running out of the men's bathhouse yelling and screaming something. And we're like, what the heck was that? And then a few minutes later, an ambulance pulls up and they go into the men's bathhouse. and they wheel this guy out that apparently had a heart attack or something and drowned in the private hot springs pool that's just beyond the men's bathhouse. And apparently he must have been the only one in there at that point and must have had a heart attack and keeled over and then drowned, and there was no one over there. Apparently someone saw him, like the next person that was going to go over there, but it was too late, and it was a Native American man. And it was one of those things too where, when you saw them wheel him out, you're like, oh, I saw that guy walk by not too long ago. And you don't think anything about, oh, I guess a guy went into the bathhouse 30 minutes ago. And I mean, you don't really notice if someone doesn't come out, or especially if you can go through and be in a private one back there and just soak. So that was weird and creepy. But on the way home, as we went through the Navajo reservation, there's a little kind of a diagonal cutoff road. I think they call it Indian Service Route 5. So we're on that. It's paved, but it's kind of a backcountry cutoff with almost no traffic on it. A car or truck or something maybe every once in a while. And it's not too bad. Occasionally you've got some hills, you're going up and down some hills a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. There was a spot we came up the hill and then we started to come down the other hill. There's no cars, no nothing. And about halfway down the hill, we could see there's some big black mass in the middle of the road in our lane, just on our side, so starting to slow down as you're coming up to it and slowing. Okay, what is that thing? It's like too big to be a dog, like a dead dog in the road. It's not wooded or anything. It's kind of high desert there. So we're like, can't be a bear. It's black, matted black fur, looks kind of mangled and bloody. And then you can kind of see the face as you're starting to get close to it. But whatever it was, you're like, did something get hit by a truck or something and it mangled it up? We're looking at it. We're like, what the heck is that thing? And we can't quite tell what it is. And you're constantly fixed on the face of it that looks kind of smashed and mangled, and it's just like it's got this trance on you. You're looking at it, you're like, what the heck is this? You're slowing down, and then at that point, it's really weird. I was at the point where I'm like, okay, I need to swerve into the other lane. I'm going pretty slow at this point. I'm probably going 5 or 10 miles an hour, kind of coming up to it now. And you're getting to the point where you don't have much room left, and you're going to have to swerve in the other lane. And I almost swerved in the other lane, and some truck came blazing by in the other lane, like probably 70 miles an hour. And we're like, where did that truck come from? It was not there. Oh. And it was like one of those things where you would hear these stories about skinwalkers and shapeshifters, and you would get your eyes glued on them and you can't take your eyes away, and they lure you to doom. And it totally felt like that, because not only that, my wife is in the passenger seat, and same thing, like, where did that truck come from? It wasn't there. We're coming down the hill, there was no traffic, no nothing coming anywhere. Then our eyes are glued on this animal, trying to figure out what it is. We're like, is that a bear? They got its face smashed in? Is that like, is it a shape-shifting person with a bear skin wrapped around them? Or was it something that was waiting for you to stop and get out of the car, and then something was going to attack you? It was one of those really weird things. So we had that happen, and then we're like, oh wow, we almost pulled into the other lane to go around it and almost got completely destroyed. So we're talking about that, and it was a kind of a weird vibe as we went down the last few miles of this road before you get back onto Highway 491 to go south into Gallup. And the creepy thing about 491 is it used to be Highway 666.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they changed the number because of the superstition. You're still on the Navajo reservation there. So we start going down Highway 491, which, like I said, used to be 666, and still in the middle of nowhere, no houses, no nothing. And down in the ditch, we see a look like a Native American woman in a white flowing light dress. She's carrying something, and it just was really weird or odd because you're like, there's no houses anywhere. Where did she come from? Where's she going? What's she doing? Walking right next to the highway down in the ditch just seemed really out of place and really weird. And so at that point, my wife and I look at each other. We're like, that's something seemed really weird or off. Like, what's this person doing there? And as we're talking about that, we're going past her and we're saying something to the kids in the back seats, and of course they didn't notice or look or anything.
Saw nothing.
Yeah,
We thought they were crazy because I didn't see it. Like, I think it was like there and then it was gone before any of us, like, because before any of us saw, because he was like, oh, there's like a lady over there. So we all turn around, obviously, because we're children. We're like, oh, that's cool. I want to see. And she's just not there.
Huh.
she wasn't there. We
Weird.
turned around. I looked
Like
looked
half a second later.
looked in the mirrors. Nothing there. Kids cranked
Really?
their heads all the way around. Not there. And we're
Huh.
like, what in the heck? But it was another situation where I knew it wasn't just me. I
Yeah.
saw it.
Oh
My
yeah.
wife saw it. And then
Yeah.
as we went past her and they turned around, gone.
Wow.
I mean, when we were driving like towards it, I thought I saw like a towel or something. And I was like, oh, that's so weird. And then I turn around and then it's gone and I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah, that was really weird. So that was all of the
Is he
Pagosa Springs trip with the dead person, the possible shapeshifter, and the weirdly disappearing ghost lady in the ditch. So
It's very interesting.
anyhow,
That's pretty nuts. Yeah.
yeah, that was pretty nuts. The last story I have to share happened when I was in college in Lincoln. This happened around 96. So this is a story that illustrates that whole butterfly effect. You know how one little change in routine can change everything.
I already know
So
this.
the normal routine for my roommates and I at this point was my buddy Mike and we both worked a schedule at this point where it was early morning. We worked early morning into the afternoon, and most of the rest of the roommates, they didn't work till 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and so we kind of had opposite schedules. So we didn't all hang out together much. And this was mid to late May because I believe college had just gotten out like a week or two earlier. And so we're all excited. Okay, cool. College is out. And the normal routine at that point would be those guys would be at work until like 11 o'clock at night and working at like 6 in the morning. I would be in bed by the time they got home. But I would usually hang out in my buddy Mike's room. As we're going to bed, we would be discussing what are you doing after work tomorrow? And maybe we made plans to go grab lunch together, go do something after we got off of work. Anyhow, the normal routine, I'd be standing in the middle of his room, and he had in the middle of his room he had a like a pull string, the old pull string lights. From the pull string he had like this little crystal ball thing that made all these weird rainbows and shadows and weird things on the wall. And so usually I would stand there, talk to him, just kind of fling that around, and it does all these weird things on the wall. It was kind of cool. So normally I know exactly where I would be standing,
Right.
and he would usually be in bed. So we'd be talking about, oh, what are you doing tomorrow after work? Or should we go do something? That was the normal routine. But on this particular night, the movie Twister had just came out. I think it came out over the weekend, but it was like midweek when we were going to go see it because it was too busy on like opening weekend. So all of us roommates, made a change from the normal routine. We go to the movie, we get home a little bit later than normal for Mike and I, and as we come into the living room, the roommates turn the TV on. Mike sees, I think the movie Bad Boys was on, and he's like, "Oh, I want to watch this."
Yeah.
So he instead stays downstairs on the couch, and some of the other roommates they're chatting about, and I went upstairs and I went to bed, and I think I just started to get to sleep, and all of a sudden I hear like this pop, 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 and I wake up like something thuds and hits me in the chest. And I'm like, what the heck? And I also feel like a bunch of powder or something on me. And I turn on my light and I'm brushing off a bunch of white dust off of me. And I'm brushing things off of my bed. And I find a bullet on the bed. And I
Yeah.
realize when I look up, where did that come from? I look and there's a hole in the wall. And so I'm like, a bullet came through the wall. That's crazy. So the dust that was all over me was like drywall dust.
Yeah.
So I look, where did that bullet come from? Well, it came from Mike's room. So I walk to Mike's room and I look, and it looks like there's holes in the wall in Mike's room. So it looked like someone outside, or, we lived on a busy street at that point. Looked like someone fired a gun from outside, and a bunch of the bullets came through. And I think when the police eventually came, I can't remember what they said. They thought it was like a MAC 10 or something kind of, I think
Yeah.
they said kind of powerful, because it went through the front wall, and it still had enough power to go across Mike's room and completely through to my wall. And then one of the bullets landed on my chest, and they knew then, because we had the bullet, what it probably was. But as we looked at that and I traced the path of that bullet would have went, likely, if we had the normal routine and Mike was in bed and I was standing in the middle of his room, the spot I normally stood, that
Yeah.
bullet would have went right through my head. And it
That's,
already had enough power to go through a whole nother wall, so it probably would have went through my head, and I probably would have been dead. One of the other bullets came through right next to the metal on the window, and all of a sudden it went and changed paths, and went right down into Mike's bed where Mike would have been.
wow.
So yeah, it
Jeez.
was one of those things. We never knew what happened. Someone drove by. Well, we had an idea, and of course, then the news came, and then we were on the news, and our house looked pretty much exactly like a house like two or three houses down.
Mhm.
And we always suspected that house may have been a drug house. There were lots of cars coming and going from that house all the time at all hours of the day and night. And so the thing we thought, well, maybe it was a case of mistaken identity. They shot up the wrong house. We didn't really know. But
Yeah.
the unfortunate thing is when the news lady came and to sensationalize the story, they actually told that on the news, that we thought that it was a case of mistaken identity and that the bullets might have been meant for the house down the way, and then they zoomed in on that house.
Oh, sheesh.
And we were like, oh my gosh, like, why would you do that? Now the people that live three houses down that are probably drug people know that our house got shot up, and we think it was meant for them, and you zoomed in on their house. No one slept at our house for a few days after that, because they were worried about there could be some retaliation, because the news people were so stupid about saying what we thought. You don't tell that story to someone and
Yeah.
expect them to do that. This is the mid '90s too. Now you may expect it with sensationalism and journalism, but not back then.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
anyhow, that was crazy.
That.
So on my other YouTube channel, where I used to post some things about cryptids and other things like that, I know I've scrubbed a lot of that stuff off of my original channel and gone mostly to Lost Gold stories and other things like that. But there was a comment on one of those stories when I had it up, and it was a crazy one that I wanted to also share, which is really creepy along these lines. So I'll read this one real quick too, because it's insane. This guy said, one of my colleagues who happens to be a geologist told me a creepy story about being in the Canadian Northwest Territories close to 35 or 40 years ago. For his master's in geology, he and another student from his university, which was some northern university in the States, were assigned to do some field work in the Northwest Territories. They flew to some small airport. Apparently, they had to go through several airports after departing the original location. Each time the planes were getting smaller and smaller. They rented a truck and they started driving hours north. I remember him saying that they had to rent a truck with extra gas reserves and also carried gas cans because there was nothing out where they were going. Along the drive, they didn't see a single car or person. And then all of a sudden, they see something laying in the road, and they slowed down, but they had to swerve to miss it. When they pass this thing in the road, they see it as a person laying down in the middle of the road. Screaming at each other about what to do, my colleague who was driving kind of freaked out and stepped on the gas. His school partner screamed for him to stop so they could go check and see if he was hurt. But when they looked back, the guy was standing up and staring back at them. They drive into the next town to check into their motel, which happened to be their destination. They mentioned what they saw to the hotel clerk, and her eyes got big as she said, "Well, I know you didn't stop because if you did, you would be dead." She said what they do is they lay in the road, and when a car approaches and someone gets out of the car to check on them and bends over the person laying on the road, will stab them or cut that good Samaritan's throat. Anyway, they were freaked out, but the next day they drove a few miles further north of that town. They turned off of the main road and they parked their truck close to where they were going to be hiking and doing their geological field work. They wanted to park the truck away from the main road in case someone thought it was abandoned. They set up camp next to this lake. They did some work and they called it a night. No problems until the next day. They were having breakfast before getting ready to set out and do some more work. That was when they heard this whizzing sound fly past them. Just above them were arrows in the trees. They stood up and got behind the trees for protection, and they could see across the lake 2 guys carrying bows and pointing more arrows at them. They had no time to grab anything. All they could do was run in the opposite direction of where their truck was. But they could run toward the road that they came in on. When they got to the road, they made a life-saving decision. They ran the opposite way of town. They assumed that the guys chasing them would have to change direction and come around the lake a little bit. So they ran in the road for quite a bit, figuring that the guys had to make their way around the lake for quite a few minutes, and they had a bit of a head start. But after several minutes, they jumped into the woods to hide. Fortunately, they were a bit away from where they had came out of the woods. They laid low and they watched 2 guys come out. They immediately started heading toward town. My colleague said they could not go back to the truck nor their campsite, and they waited for a good bit before running back to town. Fortunately, they made it with no other encounters. They got someone familiar with the area, and he was also carrying a weapon to take them back to their truck. They did not bother going back to the campsite. The guy who drove them back to the truck said it wouldn't be worth going to the campsite because everything would be gone. Never asked my colleague why the truck would still be there. Surprised it wasn't stolen. Next time I see him, I will, and I'll ask him what town this was. This story still creeps me out, and if I ever see someone laying across the road, I ain't stopping.
No kidding. Jeez. That's nuts.
So that was a story that was on one of those videos I had on on my other channel. So one of those weird occurrences, like what do you do if someone's lying in the road? And then I think back to when we almost got killed, got nailed by the truck going around whatever that creature was laying in the road. Maybe it was a similar type of situation where they were going to do something and then steal someone's vehicle, or who knows. I mean, it could have just been some kind of dead roadkill, but it was big. It was too big to be anything but a bear, but then there's no bears in that area unless it was something that maybe had been dead there for a while and bloated up real big, but it definitely wasn't a cow or anything like that. It wasn't anything you would have expected. That's all of the stories that I had to share.
Yeah.
So did you cover all your stuff you had to talk about?
So, like paranormal type stories,
Yeah.
yeah. I wonder if we saved the unidentified stuff for another podcast or
Yeah, maybe we'll do another one. We'll do another one with some unidentified stuff because I've got some things I've found on some of that too. So maybe
yeah.
that'll be our next episode. We'll get into more unidentified stuff because I know we've been going close to an hour now. So
Yep.
probably should call it a episode at this point. And thanks everyone for listening. And you can leave any of your crazy, scary, unexplained experiences in the comments, just like the one that I read that came from the comments on one of my other videos on my other channel. So
Yeah.
anyhow, thanks everybody.
Yeah, thanks for listening.